Horse goes crazy tourist gets shouted at. For visitors, it felt like stepping into a postcard, with tall trees lining the winding streets and the gentle hum of nature in the air. Every year, this small town became a popular destination for tourists looking to escape the hustle and bustle of city life. It wasn't a big place, but it had its charm. On this particular day, a young couple from abroad had just arrived in the town. They had been dreaming of this moment for weeks. Both of them loved nature, and they were eager to explore it in a way they had never done before, on horseback. They had read about the local horseback riding tour online and were excited to experience the beauty of the mountains from a completely different perspective. As they approached the stable, they could already see horses grazing peacefully in the fields, with the sun casting a golden glow over everything. It was the perfect picture of serenity. The couple could feel their excitement building with each step they took towards the stable. They were about to experience something they had only seen in movies or read about in books. The stable was charming and well kept, with the distinct smell of hay and fresh air mixing together in a pleasant way. There was an undeniable sense of calm in the air, but also a kind of quiet energy. Horses were known to be majestic animals, and you could feel their presence all around you. Some horses were peacefully resting in their stalls, while others were being gently brushed and saddled by the stable hands. As they entered, a man with a friendly face and a welcoming smile approached them. His name was Jake, and he was the tour guide for the day. He had been working with horses for over a decade, and his confidence and easygoing nature made the couple feel comfortable right away. He introduced himself and explained that he would be taking them on a guided horseback ride through the nearby trails. Jake was dressed casually in a plaid shirt, worn jeans, and boots that had clearly seen their fair share of adventures. His weathered hands showed years of experience working with horses. He was the kind of person you could tell was born to be around animals. When he smiled, you could see the deep creases in his face, marks of a life well lived. He gave the couple a quick rundown of the day's plan. They would start with a few basic riding instructions, then head out on the trails, taking in the stunning views along the way. The couple listened closely as Jake talked about the horses and what to expect. He was patient, explaining how important it was to stay calm and maintain control when riding. "These horses are gentle, but they are animals," he said, "and sometimes they can be unpredictable. Always be aware of your surroundings, and if anything feels off, let me know." The couple nodded, taking in his advice, though they were still a little nervous. They had never ridden horses before, but they were eager to learn. After all, they had come all this way to experience something new and exciting. Jake then introduced them to the horses they would be riding. The male tourist was given a strong-looking horse named Max, while the female tourist was paired with a calm, well-trained mare named Bella. Bella was known to be one of the more laid-back horses, often chosen for beginners because of her steady nature. She was a beautiful animal, with a soft, chestnut-colored coat and kind eyes that seemed to put anyone at ease. The young woman felt a rush of excitement when she saw Bella. She gently reached out to stroke the mare's neck, feeling the soft warmth of her fur. Jake instructed the couple to approach the horses slowly and respectfully. "Horses are like people," he said. "They can sense your mood. If you're nervous, they'll sense that too. But if you're calm and confident, they'll follow your lead." The couple took a deep breath, trying to steady their nerves. They were excited, yes, but there was also a touch of fear in their hearts. The thought of riding a huge animal like Bella was a little intimidating, even though they had been assured that Bella was calm and well-behaved. After helping them mount the horses, Jake gave them a brief lesson on how to hold the reins and how to sit properly in the saddle. He went over the most basic commands, like how to make the horse go forward or stop. It seemed simple enough, and the couple listened intently, but they couldn't help but feel a little overwhelmed. It was all so new, and there was so much to remember. But they trusted Jake, and they knew this was a once-in-a-lifetime experience they didn't want to miss. With the couple now on their horses, Jake signaled that it was time to start the ride. The group set off slowly, the horses moving in sync as they made their way down the well-trodden path. The couple couldn't help but marvel at the beauty around them. The trees were lush and green, their leaves whispering in the wind. The air was fresh and cool, and the scent of pine filled the air. As they trotted along, the sound of hooves on the soft ground was soothing, almost hypnotic. It felt like they were the only people in the world, riding through this beautiful wilderness. The first few minutes of the ride were peaceful. The couple began to relax a bit, enjoying the rhythm of the ride and the beauty of the surroundings. They exchanged excited whispers, pointing out different plants and animals they spotted along the way. For a brief moment, they forgot all about their nerves. Riding on horseback, with the wind in their hair and the beauty of nature surrounding them, felt like the perfect escape. Jake led them deeper into the trail, occasionally offering small bits of advice. He reminded them to keep their posture straight and their feet in the stirrups, just as he had shown them earlier. The horses were behaving beautifully, their steps steady and sure. It seemed like everything was going perfectly. But just as the couple began to settle in, something unexpected happened. The ride was going smoothly, and for the first time since they had gotten on the horses, the couple felt completely at ease. They were no longer worrying about how to sit or hold the reins. The horses were calm, the sun was shining, and the world around them felt like something out of a dream. Bella, the mare the young woman was riding, seemed to glide effortlessly along the trail. She was calm and steady, just as Jake had promised. With each step, the couple grew more comfortable. They exchanged small talk as they rode, admiring the towering trees that lined the trail and the distant mountains peeking through the gaps in the forest. They passed a few other groups of tourists who were also on horseback, but the couple barely noticed. They were lost in their own little world, enjoying the fresh air and the peaceful rhythm of the ride. The young man riding Max was beginning to feel more confident too. His horse was strong and had a bit more energy than Bella, but he followed the rhythm of the trail without much difficulty. The young man was fascinated by how smoothly everything felt. He had always wanted to try horseback riding, but now that he was actually doing it, he realized it was even more exciting than he had imagined. "Look at that view," the young woman said, pointing ahead to where the trees thinned out and revealed a sweeping view of the valley below. She was in awe of the beauty surrounding them, as if the world was completely different from the busy streets they were used to back home. Everything felt simpler, slower, and more peaceful. It was the kind of place that made you forget about everything else, even the small worries and stresses that came with everyday life. As they rode further along the path, Jake led them into a deeper part of the forest. The trail here was quieter, with fewer tourists and less noise. The trees grew even taller, their trunks thick and ancient, and the light coming through the canopy above made patterns on the ground. It felt like a magical forest, like something out of an adventure story. Birds chirped in the distance, and the only sounds were the soft footsteps of the horses and the rustling of leaves in the breeze. The couple was enjoying this peaceful moment when suddenly, a loud sound echoed through the air. It came from somewhere ahead of them on the trail, and it was a noise they hadn't expected. It wasn't like the usual sounds of nature they had been hearing. This was the roar of an engine, followed by the sound of tires skimming across gravel. Jake, who had been riding ahead, glanced over his shoulder quickly and saw what was coming. It was a motorbike. Someone was speeding down the trail. The motorbike was loud, its engine growling as it cut through the air. The rider was wearing a helmet, but it was clear they were not paying attention to their surroundings. The sound was jarring, and the way it echoed through the trees made it feel even more intense. The couple's horses, who had been moving along calmly, now seemed to sense the change in the air. Horses are incredibly sensitive to their surroundings, and they can pick up on sounds and smells that humans often miss. Bella, the mare, immediately tensed up. The young woman could feel her horse's muscles stiffen beneath her, and the horse's head jerked to the side, her ears flicking nervously. The young man also noticed a shift in Max's behavior. His horse seemed to grow more alert, his body twitching with an energy the young man hadn't seen before. He felt Max pull slightly, as if he was trying to move faster than the others. At first, it wasn't a big change. The horses were just reacting to the noise, but the tension in the air was growing. Jake turned his horse around quickly, raising a hand in warning. He had seen this kind of thing before. "Stay calm," he shouted to the couple. "Hold on tight." The motorbike sped past, its engine growling loudly, and it didn't slow down as it passed the group. The sound was overwhelming, and the horses reacted instinctively. Bella, still startled from the noise, took a sudden step back. The young woman tried to gently pull on the reins, but Bella's reaction was too quick. Before she knew it, the mare took off at a faster pace, moving faster than the young woman could control. Max, too, began to move faster. The young man tried to pull the reins back to slow him down, but the horse was already speeding up, caught in the chaos of the moment. Jake was shouting from the front, trying to give instructions, but the sound of the motorbike was still echoing in the trees, making it hard to focus. Bella's movements were wild now. She had lost control, and the young woman was struggling to regain her grip. She felt the reins in her hands tighten as the mare surged forward, moving faster with each passing second. The wind was rushing past her, and her heart raced as she tried to remember what Jake had told her earlier. But the panic of the moment was clouding her thoughts, and she felt helpless as Bella galloped down the trail. The young man was struggling too. Max was moving quickly, too fast for comfort. His horse wasn't nearly as wild as Bella, but the speed was unnerving. He shouted ahead to Jake, trying to get his attention, but the words were lost in the rush of the wind. At that moment, everything felt like it was happening in slow motion. The trees blurred as the horses charged down the trail. The ground beneath them was uneven, and the sound of the hooves was deafening. The young woman gripped the saddle as tightly as she could, her knuckles turning white. She could feel the tension in Bella's body, the way the horse's muscles bunched and released with every stride. Jake, now a few yards ahead, was still shouting instructions, but it was clear that the young woman couldn't hear him over the noise. She glanced ahead to see Jake's horse moving smoothly, his experience allowing him to stay calm. But she, on the other hand, was panicking. Bella was out of control, and she felt like she was losing her grip. Everything seemed to be happening too fast, and the forest around them was a blur. The young woman's heart was pounding, and she couldn't think straight. She just wanted Bella to slow down. She tried pulling back on the reins again, but Bella seemed to ignore her. Max was still galloping too, and the young man could feel the unease in his horse's movements. He could hear the panic in the woman's voice ahead, and the anxiety started to grow within him as well. The situation was quickly turning dangerous. The wild galloping continued for what felt like forever. Bella, the mare, surged forward, her hooves pounding the ground with a force that seemed to shake the very earth beneath her. The young woman gripped the reins tightly, her hands sweaty and trembling as she tried to regain control of the frightened horse. Bella's mane whipped through the air, and the sound of her breathing grew heavier, more erratic. The young woman's heart pounded in her chest, and she was finding it difficult to think clearly. Every instinct told her to pull the reins harder, but it felt as though Bella's fear was taking over both of them. She could feel the power of the mare beneath her, but it felt like Bella was no longer listening to her commands. The once peaceful trail had turned into a blur of motion and confusion. The trees passed by in a rush, their trunks and branches swaying as if caught in the wind. The young woman couldn't hear much besides the thunderous pounding of hooves and the rush of air in her ears. Every turn felt sharper, every step more unpredictable. The ground beneath them was uneven, with rocks and branches scattered along the path. The young woman's mind raced. She had no idea how to stop Bella. All the lessons from Jake about staying calm, about using the reins to guide the horse, seemed to fade into the background. Now, all she could think about was staying on the horse and hoping they wouldn't crash. Max, the young man's horse, wasn't far behind, but he too was caught in the panic. His horse was much stronger than Bella, and it wasn't reacting as wildly, but it was moving much faster than either rider expected. The young man struggled to keep up, pulling on the reins and trying to slow Max down, but Max was just too eager to follow the others. Every pull on the reins felt like it was barely having an effect. The young man was beginning to panic too, his heart racing as he saw the distance between himself and the woman grow wider. He shouted, trying to get her attention, but the wind and the sounds of the galloping horses drowned out his voice. At the front of the group, Jake was still shouting instructions, his horse trotting calmly along the trail, seemingly unaffected by the chaos unfolding behind him. But even Jake, with his years of experience, could see that things were quickly spiraling out of control. He knew that the situation could become dangerous in a matter of seconds. With a quick glance over his shoulder, he saw the young woman struggling to hold on to Bella, the mare's speed increasing with every passing moment. Bella was getting more frightened, and that made the young woman even more nervous. The cycle of panic between horse and rider was only escalating. "Pull back on the reins," Jake shouted again, but this time his voice was more urgent. He knew the young woman wasn't hearing him. The noise of the galloping horses was too loud, and her focus was entirely on trying to stay on Bella's back. He spurred his horse into a faster trot, trying to close the gap between himself and the couple. But it wasn't just the speed of the horses that concerned him. It was the way the horses were moving, out of control, with no clear direction. If they continued like this, there was a real risk of them veering off the trail and running into the trees or rocks. The thought sent a chill down Jake's spine. Behind him, the young woman was still struggling to control Bella, and Max wasn't helping matters. The young man was still trying to rein in his horse, but it wasn't working. He could feel his pulse in his ears, his hands shaking as he pulled on the reins again. Max had picked up speed, matching Bella's frantic pace, and the two horses were now side by side, racing down the trail. The young man's heart thudded in his chest as he tried to stay calm, but his fear only seemed to make Max more excitable. It was then that Jake saw the first sign of trouble. The trail ahead of them began to narrow. The path, which had been wide and smooth just moments ago, was now bordered by dense trees and thick underbrush. There were rocks scattered along the ground, and the uneven terrain made it difficult to navigate. If the horses didn't slow down soon, there was a very real chance they would run into something that could hurt them, either the riders or the horses themselves. Jake's mind raced. He had seen this before. It wasn't unusual for horses to get spooked by sudden noises or movements. But the way Bella and Max were reacting now was different. It wasn't just fear, it was panic, and that was dangerous. Horses were prey animals, which meant that when they felt threatened, their first instinct was to run. The more they ran, the more they fed into their own fear, and it became harder for the rider to regain control. It was a cycle that could only end badly if not stopped. "Stop! Both of you stop now!" Jake shouted, his voice stern and commanding. He wasn't shouting in anger but in desperation. His voice carried through the air, cutting through the noise of the horses and the rush of the wind. But despite his best efforts, neither rider was able to respond in time. Bella, her eyes wide with fear, took another sharp turn down the trail, veering dangerously close to a thick cluster of trees. The young woman tried desperately to steer the mare back onto the path, but the horse was moving too fast. Bella's hooves struck a rock, causing the mare to stumble slightly, but she quickly regained her footing and continued running. The young woman gasped, feeling her stomach lurch as the horse's speed picked up again. Max, too, seemed to lose any sense of control. The young man's attempts to steer his horse back into line were futile. Max's eyes were wide, and he was galloping with all the force of a horse who felt like he had no boundaries. The young man could feel himself losing control, the reins slipping in his hands as Max pulled away with terrifying speed. The trail was no longer just a beautiful, peaceful ride through the forest. It had become a race against danger. With every passing second, the chance of something going wrong increased. The uneven ground, the trees, and the rocks on the trail now seemed like obstacles that were just waiting to cause an accident. Jake's voice rang out again, but it was almost as if the riders were too far gone in their panic to hear him. The young woman tried to keep her body balanced as Bella charged forward, her arms gripping the reins tightly. Her heart was racing, and her mind was a blur of thoughts. She needed to stop Bella, she needed to slow down, but all she could do was hold on and hope that Jake would be able to help them before it was too late. Max was still galloping beside them, and the young man's fear grew with each passing second. The trees ahead seemed to be closing in, and the path had become too narrow to avoid the dangers that lay ahead. Both riders and horses were trapped in a cycle of fear and confusion, and the outcome was looking more and more uncertain with every stride. The situation was quickly escalating out of control. Bella, the mare, was running so fast now that the young woman could barely keep her seat. Her body was being jostled with each powerful stride the horse took, and her grip on the reins was slipping. The wind was a constant force against her face, making it hard to think straight. Her heart pounded in her chest, matching the thudding of Bella's hooves. The trail seemed to stretch on forever, and yet she knew she couldn't keep going like this. Every instinct inside her screamed for the horse to stop, but Bella was too panicked to listen. Max, the young man's horse, was still running beside them, though not as wildly as Bella. But even with his stronger frame and steadier gait, Max was too fast, and his rider was too shaken to rein him in. The young man was no longer thinking clearly. His hands were sweaty and gripping the reins with all his strength, but Max was pulling him along with a speed he hadn't expected. The trees and rocks on the trail blurred past them as if time itself had sped up. Every so often, the young man would glance at the woman ahead of him, desperate to make sure she was okay. He could see the fear in her eyes, and it mirrored his own. They were both trapped in a situation that was rapidly getting out of hand. At the front of the group, Jake was now riding with a purpose, his horse moving faster than before. He could see the trouble unfolding behind him, and his experienced eyes knew exactly how serious the situation had become. His mind raced with strategies for stopping the horses, but he also knew that time was running out. He needed to act fast. "Pull back on the reins. Both of you pull back," Jake shouted, his voice full of authority but also a hint of worry. He had been in situations like this before, but never with such inexperienced riders and never with such a dangerous level of panic. He could see the trail ahead narrowing, the trees getting thicker, and the path becoming more uneven. If the horses didn't slow down soon, there was a real risk of them running straight into the forest or even crashing into a boulder. Jake's heart skipped a beat at the thought. The young woman, still struggling to control Bella, was too far gone in her panic to hear Jake's shouts. The mare was now in full flight, and the young woman had no idea how to make her stop. She remembered what Jake had told her earlier, how to pull back on the reins and squeeze her legs to guide the horse. But in the heat of the moment, she couldn't think of anything except holding on and hoping Bella would calm down. The path beneath them was bumpy, and the horse's hooves kicked up dirt and rocks with each step. It felt like they were flying through the air, and the young woman was starting to lose hope that she could regain control. Max, on the other hand, was still galloping alongside them, his rider trying his best to slow him down. The young man was pulling on the reins as hard as he could, but it felt like nothing was working. His horse was caught in the chaos, just as much a victim of the situation as he was. The young man's legs were bouncing in the stirrups with each jolt of the horse's movement. His mind was racing with thoughts of what could happen next. He didn't want to get separated from the woman, but he didn't know if he could keep up with her. His fear was starting to overtake his ability to think logically. Jake, seeing the increasing danger, was beginning to push his own horse harder. He knew he had to get closer to the couple before things got worse. His heart was racing too, but he had the experience to stay calm. He tried to think of ways to stop the horses without causing them more distress, but there was only one option that made sense now. He had to get ahead of them and block the path. As Jake rode faster, his mind worked quickly. He scanned the trail ahead, looking for the right moment to make his move. He could see the young woman's panic, and he knew he had to intervene before things got out of hand. If he didn't, the horses might run straight into the woods where the terrain was even rougher. Or worse, they might end up falling or colliding with one of the large rocks that lay ahead. Finally, as the horses thundered down the trail, Jake spotted a large, open space ahead, a clearing where the trail widened. He knew this was his chance. He urged his horse forward, riding at full speed toward the clearing, hoping to get in front of the horses before they reached the dangerous section of the trail. As Jake's horse galloped ahead, the wind whipped around him, and his focus narrowed to the task at hand. He could hear the thundering hooves behind him, growing louder and louder, but he wasn't going to let the horses get any further. He had to stop them. At that moment, Bella, still racing forward with the young woman clinging desperately to the reins, suddenly swerved to the right. The mare's panic had led her to the edge of the trail, and for a brief moment, the young woman thought they were going to fall off the path entirely. Her heart skipped a beat as she felt Bella's body jerk, but she managed to keep her balance, squeezing her legs to try and bring the mare back onto the trail. Max followed suit, veering off the main path slightly as well, though not as wildly as Bella. The young man had his hands full, still pulling on the reins and trying to control his horse's speed. His eyes darted to the side, where the path became even more treacherous, filled with large rocks and overgrown bushes. If Max didn't slow down, they would be in serious trouble. Then, in the middle of the chaos, something unexpected happened. Jake, who had reached the clearing first, turned his horse sharply and blocked the path ahead of the two runaway horses. His horse, a sturdy and well-trained animal, came to a stop with surprising ease. Jake pulled on the reins, bringing the horse to a halt right in front of the oncoming horses. He shouted once more, his voice firm and commanding, "Stop, now!" For a moment, it seemed like nothing was going to work. The horses kept charging forward, and the sound of their hooves was deafening. But then, something clicked. The young woman, exhausted from the struggle, finally remembered everything Jake had taught her. She took a deep breath and, with all the strength she had left, pulled back sharply on the reins, her fingers digging into the leather straps. Bella, sensing the change in the rider's posture, hesitated. The young woman pulled again, this time more firmly, guiding the horse's head to one side. Bella slowed. Max, too, slowed down as the young man finally managed to control his horse, feeling the reins grow tight in his hands. The panic was still there, but now, with Jake ahead of them and both riders fully engaged, the horses began to calm. Jake stayed firm, watching carefully as the horses' frantic galloping turned into a trot, then finally a full stop. The young woman, breathless and shaking, gently stroked Bella's neck, relieved that the horse had finally calmed. She couldn't believe it. For a moment she thought they were both going to crash, but now, in the stillness of the moment, it was clear that they had survived. As the dust settled and the adrenaline began to fade, the young woman took a long, shaky breath. She was still sitting on Bella, her hands gripping the reins, but now with a steadier hold. The fear that had once overwhelmed her was slowly giving way to relief. Bella, the mare, was still trembling, her nostrils flaring with every breath, but she had finally come to a halt. The young woman couldn't believe it. They had stopped. After what felt like an eternity of racing through the trail, they were finally still. The young man, still gripping the reins of Max, was also coming down from the high of fear. Max, although not as wild as Bella, had been running far too fast. The young man's hands were sore from holding the reins so tightly, but now, with the horses stopped, he could finally take a breath and check on the woman ahead of him. He was thankful, too, that he had managed to slow Max down before things got worse. His heart was still pounding and his mind was racing, but at least, for now, everything was safe. Jake, who had positioned himself in front of them and forced his horse to a stop, kept his eyes on the riders. His gaze softened as he observed the young woman still perched on Bella, the mare now calmer but still jittery. The young man, too, looked exhausted but relieved. Jake's own horse, which had been standing calmly this whole time, shifted its weight, ready to move again if needed. But for now, there was no need. The riders had regained control. "Good," Jake said, his voice firm but not unkind. "You both did well to calm the horses down." That was a close one. His words carried a weight of experience, a reminder that the situation could have gone a lot differently. The young woman nodded, though her hands were still shaking slightly from the adrenaline. I didn't know what to do," she admitted, her voice shaky. "I was just holding on, hoping Bella would stop." Jake gave a reassuring smile. "It's okay. That's the first step, just holding on. But next time you'll know better. Horses pick up on your emotions. The more calm you stay, the more your horse will trust you." The panic you felt, Bella could feel it too. That's why she was so out of control. The young man nodded slowly, looking over at the woman, grateful that she was safe. "I guess we both panicked," he said, his voice still tinged with disbelief at what had just happened. "I didn't know horses could get that spooked." "They can," Jake said with a small nod. "Horses are prey animals, and when something scares them, they don't hesitate to run. The key is to stay calm and take control. It's not just about keeping your horse under control. It's about keeping yourself calm too." The young woman, still breathing a little heavily, looked down at Bella, whose muscles were slowly relaxing under her. She reached out a hand and gently stroked the mare's neck. "Thank you," she whispered to the horse, as if Bella understood her gratitude. The mare's ears flicked slightly in response, but she remained calm, standing quietly now. The young man did the same with Max, giving the horse a gentle pat on the neck. Max was calmer now too, though his body was still slightly tense from the experience. The young man took a moment to reflect on everything that had just happened. He had been nervous at first, but now, after all the chaos, he felt an odd sense of accomplishment. They had gotten through it. They hadn't fallen and they hadn't been hurt. They were okay. Jake's calm, steady presence had made all the difference. The young man realized how lucky they were to have someone so experienced with them. "Thank you for helping us," he said, his voice sincere. "I don't know what we would have done without you." Jake waved off the thanks. "That's what I'm here for, to make sure nothing goes wrong. It's all about being prepared for the unexpected. Horses are unpredictable. No matter how calm and steady they seem, they're animals and you can't control everything. But with the right guidance, you can avoid disaster." The young woman nodded again, still processing the lesson she had learned. "I didn't realize how much it takes to be in control. I thought riding would just be about sitting on the horse and going for a nice ride, but it's so much more than that." Jake gave her a knowing look. "That's a common mistake. Horseback riding is not just about the horse. It's about both you and the horse working together. You guide them with your confidence, they trust you and you trust them." The young man added, "I guess we have a lot to learn." "Everyone does," Jake replied with a smile. "That's the beauty of it. You can always improve. Every ride teaches you something new." They all took a moment of silence, each lost in their thoughts. The young woman took a deep breath and for the first time felt like she had gained something valuable from the experience. Yes, It had been terrifying. Yes, she had been frightened, but she had also learned something about herself. She had learned to stay calm in the face of fear, even when everything around her was out of control. She knew now that horseback riding wasn't just a hobby, it was a skill, a way of connecting with another living being in a way that required patience, focus, and trust. After a few more moments of quiet, Jake spoke again. "All right, let's head back to the stable. We'll take it slow from here. You've had enough excitement for one day." The young woman nodded gratefully. She was still shaken, but she was proud of herself for getting through it. She glanced at the young man, who gave her an encouraging smile. "Let's go," he said, his voice calm once again. They gently nudged their horses forward, taking it slow as Jake led the way back to the stable. As they rode back down the trail, the young woman reflected on the experience. It had been a terrifying moment, but it was also one of the most thrilling things she had ever done. The lesson she had learned wasn't just about riding a horse. It was about how to face fear, how to trust, and how to find control in the most chaotic of situations. She realized that the experience had made her stronger, more confident, and ready for whatever might come next. When they finally arrived back at the stable, the horses were calm, and the tension in the air had dissipated. The young woman dismounted first, her legs a little shaky but proud of herself. The young man followed her, both of them feeling a sense of accomplishment. They had faced something difficult together, and they had made it through. Jake, watching them with a knowing smile, nodded in approval. "Good job today," he said. "Remember, every ride is a lesson. Today you learned a big one." The young woman smiled, feeling a sense of pride in her chest. "I'll never forget this," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. As they walked away from the horses, ready to leave the stable behind them, they both knew that this was an experience they would carry with them for the rest of their lives. It was a reminder that life, like horseback riding, was unpredictable, and that sometimes the most valuable lessons came from the most unexpected challenges.